podcast. And I am joined today. I'm going to call you a new friend and buddy because I did get to meet you in person. Isn't it amazing what social media can do in a positive light, Ken?
Dude,
Um,
absolutely.
so I am
Absolutely.
talking to the talented Kenneth Knight of the Casper Dojo up in Casper, Wyoming. Just a lovely 3.5 hour jaunt. It's not far at
Mhm.
all. So,
Nice and
Susie,
close.
I know you're probably going to listen to this, and yes, 3.5 hours is not a ridiculous amount of time to drive
It's
to go
not.
anywhere. So, yeah, Ken, how are you doing today? Good to see you, my friend.
Man, I'm doing good, and it's good to see you too. And yeah, I think friend is the right term. You and I hit it off really well online, but man, getting a chance to get together, it was like we'd known each other forever. So super super awesome. Love this relationship that we're building, and I'm doing well. I'm having a great time today, and really excited to be on having a chat with you, catching up since it's been a little bit since we got together. Yeah, just super excited.
Awesome, awesome. So, Ken, on our podcast, we usually do and this will be the shout out to Greg. What is your Kryptonian martial arts origin story, my friend? What got
Ah,
you
the origin
interested?
story. Yeah, it's funny when I think about stuff like that. I have so many influences and so many inspirations and all that. And so when I think about that in terms of myself, I'm like, I'm kind of not really anybody. I don't really have a fancy story. I don't have, you know, big names or a long history. I'm 40 years old, so I'm not. I have a time where I trained with really interesting names in the, of the old times and that kind of stuff. I don't have any of that. Um, I'm just a guy, just a dude in Casper, Wyoming, who nerds out about the martial arts and really loves it. I got into it because I loved everything about it. I I loved all of the commercial concepts, right? The Power Rangers and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and was a
Yep.
huge Van Damme fan. Watched everything Van Damme did, and watched the Chuck Norris and watched all that kind of stuff. As much as I admire Bruce Lee and who he was as a philosopher and a thinker. I didn't actually watch a ton of his stuff. I didn't dislike it. I just never really sought it out very much. Um, and so I fell in love with that kind of stuff and enjoyed ingesting it. But it wasn't until, I don't know, early teens that my stepdad set us up in a karate school. Me and my little brother went and did that briefly while I was in Alabama. And then it was time to come back to Casper to do school because I'd spend the summers in Alabama. And when I came back, he just said, find a Japanese karate school, you'll be okay. And of course, at that time, the only thing you could find was Taekwondo schools
Yep.
and that. And I don't know why. Like the person I am now would have just like tried something. But for whatever reason, because it wasn't what I was told to
Yeah.
find, I just didn't. I just didn't. Uh, so it'd be a long time before I met my instructor, Andrew Finley, and his background, Okinawa Kempo and Seo Shorin-ryu, Karate, Kobudo, Mariyoshi Kobudo, Jiu-Jitsu. He's got a variety of things, trains a lot of stuff. He also did the Eskrima. And I met him through work. He invited me to come check out a class, and I've been there ever since. And that's that's kind of that. I eventually met, also through work, one of the guys I worked with said, "Hey man, you're into all this stuff. You'd probably like the stuff my uncle does with these sticks. He does this stuff with sticks. It's probably pretty cool." And I remember we got like a 6 pack of beer and we went over to his uncle's apartment, and and he's like chain smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and talking so passionately about Kali Eskrima. And we start doing some drills and we're doing stuff. And it's so funny because he's so kind of aloof. I mean, like I said, he's been drinking, he's doing whatever. But we're doing like sticky hands and stuff like that. He's just stuck to me. He's talking over here and he's just like stuck. Man, this is so cool. This is really neat. So I started training with him for a little bit and found out that he had also been training with my instructor Andy, and started doing that for a while and then had to stop because uh, they would take a break over the summer, and then when they came back, it was the same. They decided to move it to the same nights I did karate. I was already committed over there, so I just
Yeah.
stuck with the karate. I guess the short list is my main influences myself are Okinawa Kempo, Seo Shorin-ryu Karate, and Kobudo, Mariyoshi Kobudo, um, another branch of Okinawa Kempo. I trained for a while in uh, Aikido, trained for quite a while in the Eskrima. I still do that. And then through the instructor, Kyoshi Simon Sherborne, that was where we were getting Mariyoshi Kobudo and uh, the Okinawa Kempo. He also was training with Hoist Gracie, and that's kind of what got started with the jujitsu side of things. And that's kind of it. Just kind of been doing that, falling in love with it, and pursuing it ever since.
Would
It's
you
been
consider your Would you consider yourself a mixed martial artist?
not by that term, only because I
Sure.
believe when that term first came out, mixed martial arts meant a mixture of martial arts. Now I think enough time has gone on that mixed martial arts means a very specific thing.
Yeah.
And I don't identify with that particular thing, but the idea of having multiple influence in a way, what I'd actually prefer to say is a traditional martial artist. I feel like traditional martial artists had different teachers. They trained with different people. They had a lot of influences, and in that way, I feel more traditional than mixed.
Agreed. Agreed,
Yeah.
sir.
I
Agreed.
started I started on Halloween, so I guess technically I just had an anniversary. So I've been doing this for 18 years and been teaching for quite a while now. I've taken on the Eskrima and the karate and all of that. I've taken over the school, and I'm now the head instructor of those schools and running those programs here in Casper.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I am going to give you a huge compliment as well as your students, so you can definitely pass this on to them. You know, I've done around the state of Colorado, and I've been to many schools, and I have been treated well. I can honestly say that I've never been treated bad. But your school was the most memorable, best group
Mm,
I've ever worked with. As far as I'm not, because I really love my group down at 5280 Shaolin, but I'm consistently down there. And so that's one of what I would consider one of the best groups that I've worked with on the long term, building out that relationship and
yeah.
setting goals and standards with those students. Because Sifu John and Sifu Chris are really awesome in opening up their school to me. I'm only going down a couple times a month, but I really set the pace on the student teacher interaction and then the student student interaction, which I think is great. And your students were attentive, they were polite,
Mm,
respectful, and some of the questions that I really loved, um, they were thoughtful and informative. They were like, okay, this is a really cool drill, but how does it tie into, this or that? Or can you also, and that was another thing too, can you also do this with this
mm,
drill or this new material? So I think that was really inquisitive. And I think you really have a special culture in
mm.
that school. What would you equate that to, Ken? Is that on your shoulders? Is that kind of a communal thing? What do you think that is, sir?
Well, I guess first off, I mean, thank you. I'm really glad that that's how you felt when you trained with everybody. That means a lot to me. Um, it's funny because you have your expectations of what things are like, and I guess in a way, I just kind of thought that's what it's always like. Um, my instructor was very open and welcoming. That's my instructor Andy, and he was always very open and welcome. But he was pretty brass tacks. Let's get to doing this and that sort of thing. But I mean, always everybody always felt welcome. Everybody always felt like they had the ability to be there. That it was a place for them, and because that's how I felt, that's how I always wanted it to feel. And because in a sense, the my entire philosophy on running a school is to provide to the community what I felt like I got by doing martial arts. And so that was what it always felt like to me. Uh, you don't hit it off with everybody. You hit it off with most people or whatever, and some of the people hit it off with other people. They don't hit it off with you. That's fine. Um, but it always felt there. I think that feeling included, feeling welcome, feeling heard, uh, to a degree, feeling understood whenever possible. That those are really critical and important things. And I think if you think it's important, then you make time for it. You make time to foster that, and I feel like I'm blessed with the students that I have because I'm surrounded by so many great people, and I don't take credit for what they do because I feel like that's who they are, and they're incredible. Really, really good people. We've got young and old and everywhere in between, and I don't know. I feel like over the years, the people who wouldn't fit the description you gave have kind of just found their way somewhere else. Um, we've never really sent anybody packing, but it just seems like the ones that I could get concerned, like I don't know if this is going to be okay long term. The moment I start kind of worrying about whether or not it's going to be okay, I also notice that maybe I just haven't seen them in a while, and they've kind of stopped coming around. And so I just assume the culture breeds the culture, and it also
Mhm.
culls the people who don't fit that culture. Uh, it's kind of an interesting deal. As far as the inquisitive nature, that is something that I strive for constantly. Um, and maybe is a little more uniquely me because my instruction, the instruction I received was very centered around here is the material, here is the idea, do it, figure it out, figure out what works for you, uh, explore it. And a culture that I've tried to have is a more Socratic culture, lots of questions. Very often, if somebody asks me a question, I ask them a question in return to draw them to thinking, well, you probably already have a thought. When you asked your question, you probably already had a thought about what you thought it meant or
Yes.
what you thought the answer was. So let me hear it. Let's start with that. And generally, most of the time, that's in a group. So it's like, okay, well, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Uh, and we just start a discussion. And of course, I have my own feelings, and I will eventually include them. But I try to start whenever possible with not my feelings. Like, where are you? The longer you've trained with me, you probably already have some thoughts about what my answer would be, what you think that answer would be anyway. So let me hear it. Let me hear where I've led you, uh, and let me see if I agree with what I think that I've taught you. Because we have as teachers, we have the ability to train you to think a certain way,
Yeah.
and we also have the ability to not agree with that way, right? We can think we're helping you one direction and actually be taking you another direction, and you've got to
Mhm.
hear, you've got to listen to know. You know, it's if they think something wild and differently than you would want in that moment. Uh, More often than not, it's because you somehow fostered that thought. And so it's a good time to check where in what I'm teaching, what I'm talking about, what I'm doing, am I creating this as a thought pattern for you? And so you got to listen. And I think the Socratic method is a really good way to do that. And
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
well,
great.
I just think, when you have a culture that does that, where you work with a lot of questions and those questions feel heard and feel valued, uh, that people get confidence in asking questions.
Hmm.
The other thing I do is I'm just straight to the point. I love questions, and I make people know that right away. Like if you have questions, ask them. If you have questions later, ask them then. You can stop me. Uh, I don't care. Like it's more
Sure.
important to me that you're getting your answers. And I think all of that combined leads to that being just the culture of the place, and it's certainly the culture that I want it to reflect. So it's really important to me and really special to me that's how you described your experience with us.
It's strange to me because I'm listening to you talk, and not to put words in your mouth, but I'll see. We'll see if we can go down this path together. That sounds like high levels of communication, and I
Mm,
think too many people in the world of martial arts, whether it be classical or modern, are so focused on showing what a technique is
mm,
and not having the ability to communicate how to learn. I
mm,
really feel that's almost like a different skill set.
sure.
You've got your system, and then
Yeah.
you've got your teaching. And I really believe that they need to be married, of course. They
Hmm.
can't be two globes on their own. I'm a teacher over here, and I'm a martial arts instructor over here. But I really believe that there is no bridge. And I don't. I find that a lot of teachers that I bump into are only focused on that martial art and not communicating what it is or how to do it or things like that. And would you say that communication is a big part of that with
I
the
think so.
questioning.
I absolutely think that. I mean, communication is one of the most important things. Something that I have spent a lot of time trying to understand as I have become exposed to more potential in the world, uh, is that you don't have any control over how you're received. You can try your best. You make assumptions as to the way that you think you can get through to someone, but you still have no 0% guarantee that they heard what you said the way you intended them to hear it. And there's so many things that play a role into that. I've worked with very intelligent people. I've worked with people that have learning disabilities. I've worked with people in the autism spectrum. I've worked with people that have uh, things like aphantasia, where they can't visualize, like in their head, they can't picture. And as I learn more about all these different ways that we perceive, then I realize that I don't have a lot of control over what you learn. So instead, maybe the most important thing is that I create an environment where you feel like you can shape your instruction,
Mm.
because you're the only person who's ever going to be able to teach you. And that's a conversation that we have a lot, is that it sounds weird or whatever, but I say, I've
No, I
never
love it.
taught you anything. I've never taught you anything. I have presented material. I've created opportunities. Um, but there's no knowledge that you have that didn't pass through your own filter of understanding first. So you are the person who taught you the things that you know how to do. And especially when it comes to motor skills, you had to translate that thought into physical action, and then you had to come to understand whether or not that physical action was correct. Um, and so you are your best teacher. If that is true, then the best way to understand and the best way to learn is to be allowed control over the environment in which you learn. And so different people on the mat are going to learn differently. Some people need to feel a thing. Some people need to see a thing. Some people need to hear a thing. Everybody needs a combination of the above. It's just which parts are more prevalent for you versus others. What's your majority scale? Uh, and so when you focus on that and you spend a lot of time realizing that you don't actually have any way to understand what the other person is understanding, I think the importance shifts to observing whether or not what you wanted to see is being reflected afterwards, and also being open to the fact that sometimes the thing that's reflected, if it doesn't match what you're doing, doesn't mean that it's wrong. It might actually even be better. You might learn
Mm.
yourself if you allow yourself to see what they're doing and go, you know what, that's not what I showed you, but I like it. Like, hey,
Let's
everybody,
keep
why don't we
this.
look at this? Let's see. I want you to watch the way this person does it. Try that. See if that works better for you. That's not how I do it, but maybe it works good. I think those opportunities are so powerful. And I think they get missed if it's a monarchy and there's only one viewpoint. There can never be just one viewpoint in physical skills. Uh, and to go with that, we do spend a lot of time on why. Why? Why would you do this? Why does it work? When would you choose it? Is there a when that makes it functional versus a when that doesn't? Timing is an important thing. If I do this now, it's not very useful, but if I do this then, it is useful. If you don't understand those things, that's being gifted a hardware store, right? Versus being given tools over time that you come to understand at least a single instance of its
Yes.
usefulness.
Yes.
Having a large tool inventory only does you good if you know what those tools do and when to use them. And guess what? When it comes to tools, we all use tools wrong. Um, Everybody has whacked something with not a hammer. Everybody has turned a thing with not a screwdriver.
Yep.
Uh, and to me, that's the most important thing. Understand what the best tool would be, but also recognize the principle of the action that's taking place, and where a surrogate tool may not do as good of a job, but is available for that job. I think that's important.
I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, totally. Totally, totally. Okay, here's a curveball. I don't know where this popped in my head, but listening to you speak, this one popped in there. So I don't know. Maybe you stirred something in my brain. So what do you
Good.
use as a measuring stick to how you would self-diagnose, if you will, if the communication is going well, whether it be the lesson. Do you give yourself like the immediate, okay, for this technique, for this lesson, or do you look at, maybe a couple weeks on the same material, or are you looking at a 3 or 4 month time scale on, okay, this material is very rich, it's going to take some time for these guys to get it, or do you kind of have a variable slide scale on how
Mhm.
you see the material being translated for your students? Are they absorbing it? Do they understand
Yeah.
this?
Um, yeah, it's not something that I'm aware of. I don't have like, and it'd probably be valuable to have like a written idea of how this assessment should be made. Generally, to answer it the best way that I can, generally the philosophy would be in the moment that the instruction is provided. And now that I'm working more with students in the school teaching and me um, mentoring and being available rather than doing direct instruction as much. That's just kind of where we're at with the students in the school. Even in their case, part of the observation is not even just is my lesson being absorbed by you, but is the lesson that's being presented to you being absorbed. Initially, I think it's really important that as much as possible, whatever principles or concepts are critical for the thing being shown, uh, that there's immediate assessment made as to whether or not that's starting to be understood because everything takes time. Hopefully, people are willing to put in more time than you physically see, time on their own. Sometimes I know for me, a lot of it's in my head anyway while I think about it, even if I
Sure.
can't physically do it. Um, so because things take time, there's a strong potential that if you're not understanding the basic concept, then all of that time might veer you off course and make everything else take more time to come together later. So there's
Sure.
an initial moment where the assessment has to be, is the basic concept being understood? Not are you doing it well? Don't care about that. Is the basic concept understood, or the basic goal? What is the goal? I had this conversation with somebody yesterday. We were talking. They were doing some jujitsu, and we were talking about just I guess kind of jujitsu in general. But one of the topics that we used was guard passing. And I said, if I'm in your guard, and so the drill is that I get past your guard, get to mount, or you sweep me or whatever. That's the drill. What is my goal? Boil it down, nice and simple. What's the simplest way you can put my goal? There are a lot of answers. Okay, to get to mount or to get to a better position or this or that. Uh, and then we talked for a minute about, well, I think the goal is actually to get past your knee line. This particular obstacle is what makes guard guard. And if I can't achieve that, then I haven't passed your guard. But if I understand that that's what I'm trying to do, who cares how I do it? Uh, and then we laughed a little bit because I showed one of the guys, a wrestler, he's very fun, who they've worked with, and I said, you go if you watch this guy, he's going to do this, and I did a cartwheel over to the other side. I'm like, it still counts. It's still passing the guard because at the end of the day, the object was to get past the knee line. If you can understand what the object is, then you've got freedom to determine how to achieve it.
I
But
love
if you
that.
don't understand what the object is,
Yep.
then everything that you're doing to compute whether or not you are self-diagnosing properly is based on the wrong thing. So the first step is, do you understand the concept of what you're trying to do? Not the physical elements, not the physics, not the reasons or the stylistic ways or this or that, but do you know what you're trying to accomplish? And are you attaching whatever you're doing, what you see me do or what you see them do, to the goal, and are you seeing the goal being accomplished by this method? And are you maybe also seeing that other methods could do it? After that, to continue with your question, after that, it's just observation over time. We spar at the end of every class, or you'll watch them interact with different people, and then it's just, okay, is it starting to happen for you? Are you intentionally trying to do it? Like, can I actually see that you were trying to do that thing that you've been
Mhm.
working on for the last week or two, intentionally? And then, are you starting to feel good about it? Have you become confident enough now? Maybe more times pass, and now I'm seeing you do it, and I can tell that you're really actually not thinking about it. You've been doing it enough, you've been trying enough intentionally that now it's starting to happen even when you're not thinking about it. And that's that skill development that you want to see, is that you've developed a way that works for you. You've intentionally tried to accomplish it in a variety of situations. And once you started to do that and got the feedback of what failed, what worked, and you continue to refine it for yourself, is it starting to be a part of who you are? Now, notice the one thing I didn't care about is, does it look like the way I showed you?
Sure.
Because I don't actually care about that. If you come up with a way that works better for you, for your size, your physicality, maybe just because of the other things that you like to do afterwards, um, if you've come up with a way that works for you, that follows that principle, because generally, from an instructional standpoint, it's, have I passed this principle to you? If you've come up with a way that's working for you and it's starting to be good, then the job here is done, whether you have it my way or not, because my way is only the way that I figured out worked for me. And the person next to me probably has a way that looks different for them. And that's fine.
It's a concept forward instead
Yeah.
of, you go through all the layers of, it's got to be this position, it's got to be, your weight has to be 90% into this leg and 10% into that one, and that
Yeah.
kind of long process. And then, pardon me, after years of training, it's like, oh well, this is the one thing that you've been working on this entire time. And it's like, why didn't I get that the first freaking day?
Yeah.
Why didn't I get that the first
I've
day?
thought
Because
a lot about that here not too long ago, probably maybe a year, as far as a year ago, um, that concepts of, like, well, what's a stance? A stance is 70-30 or whatever. And I truly believe it doesn't matter. I don't care what the numbers are, because if you know what the goal is with that stance, if you're pushing, if you're pulling, if you're turning, if you're whatever,
sure,
lifting, dropping, whatever, if you know what that is, well, first off, you will either succeed or not succeed depending on whether or not you did enough. So if it takes 70% to do it, you'll probably find that, or you won't do it. You might go further and you'll do more, and you're like, oh, I didn't actually want to push you as much as I pushed you. Okay, well, then next time you might not push as much. But is that 70%? Is that your 70%? Is that my
sure,
70%? Who's
yeah,
70%? It doesn't really matter, because your 70% also might match up with somebody your size, but it might take 80% with somebody bigger, and it might take only 50% with somebody smaller. So why the importance of this specific number? I think it gets in the way of understanding instead, why does this work, and do enough that it works. And if it doesn't work, you might need a little more. And if it works too well, you might need a little less. But what is that number? How do you even design a scale that tells you what percentage you're using? I don't know a way to do that. I can't tell you this is my 50%. Uh, I certainly can't pull a scale out and be like, well, here's 100%, and that's what it registers on the scale.
sure.
And then here's 50%. I checked, because now I'm hitting exactly 50. How do you know that? And how do you know that in the moment? Meanwhile, um, if somebody throws something to you and you reach out and catch it, or you decide to hit someone or whatever it is, you do like really complex math instantly without
That's
any
right.
thought.
Hmm.
Why should we get in the way by actually trying to specifically do the math? Uh, that's not for live action. That's for computational and hypothesis and stuff like that. If you want to chase that, do it, but you're not going to do it while you're sparring. You're not going to be getting a whiteboard out on one hand and punching with the other hand. They're separate things.
I love that. That's great. That's great. Okay. So you have three different arts in the school. You probably have more
Uh-huh.
than that, but I'm going to talk
Yep.
about the three: karate, the Eskrima, and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Sure.
Would you say that if somebody trained all of your arts in the school, and this might be again more of the individual and how they learn over, it's got to be this way, it's got to be cookie cutter. Would you say that you look to compartmentalize those arts individually and then let them come out naturally, in the student with live sparring?
Sure.
Or do you piecemeal certain connections out of the systems and you're like, okay, this is a bridge. This concept bridges all these arts. Okay, this concept bridges all these arts. And now you can start to you've got your 3 layers of cakes, right? You've got strawberry at the bottom, vanilla in the middle, and the chocolate. And then that frosting, it looks just like one cake, right?
Sure.
Is that more of a way that you try to teach the material?
So when it comes to the materials, I try to teach them independently as though they're the only thing that I'm teaching. I do that to honor the thing that it is. I don't think it's fair to the thing, the art itself, and the history and the lineage of the art, to bastardize it, for a lack of a better word, into just being, well, this is, you can do this or that or whatever. I try to use methods that art would use, drills that art would use, uh, terminology that art would use. Every now and again, I might mention it to a student if I know that they also train a thing. There's 2 types of correction, right? There, correction or instruction, where you're speaking to the group and they're speaking to an individual. So generally, I won't introduce another arts concept to the group. I may mention it to the individual. Hey, you were doing something like this last week in your other class, if that helps you. I try not to spend a lot of time on it because, for one, it's alienating for the people who don't do the other arts, and it shouldn't feel that way. If you want to do them with me, great. If this is your art, great. I don't want it to be like, well, man, it seems like you really only teach to the Eskrima guys, because every time you do a karate lesson, you're always talking about Eskrima. Well, that's not fair. That's not fair to them. It's not fair to karate, and it's not fair to the students who aren't doing Eskrima.
Yeah.
So I try to teach them independently the way that I feel they need to be taught. It's not necessarily exactly the way that I was ever taught, because I think as teachers, we teach our own ways. And I think that that's natural and it's appropriate. But the other thing is when it comes to how the arts move together and how the body moves, the one thing that I cannot turn off is how I move. So while some people might be like, okay, this is what his karate looks like, somebody that trains something else might be like, when he does that, he looks like he's doing Eskrima, or he looks like he's doing jujitsu. Somebody who sees it all might see more, but I can't turn off how I move. The truth is, I have done all 3 for a long time. My body is an amalgamation of those. The instruction is isolated, but my movement is not. And it will never be that I move a certain way when I do this and I move a certain way when I do that. That's not how that works. It's fun in the movies and it's fun in anime and it's fun like that. I love it, but it's not how it actually works. Students that do multiple, I don't create the connections for them because it's up to them to do so. Connections that you make yourself are more valuable than connections that you're given. So it doesn't really matter. Here's the lesson. Here's what we're doing. And then if they find out, hey, when I apply it the way that I do this thing and this other art, that it works better for me. Great. Cool. It's important that they figure those things out themselves. I do have students that train only one art. I have students that train, 2 of 3. And then I have students that train all 3. And that's entirely up to them. And the connections that they make from thing to thing are on them to make. And when they start to do that, do I feel like they have an advantage when that's the case? 100%. Because I think you're always going to have a root art. That's something that my instructor always said. He said, you'll always have your root.
Yep, agreed.
You're going to have that no matter what you do. And so if that is true, then the other arts you do, while they might be something, even a strong focus, or even your primary focus for whatever reason, they still probably boil down to a strong perception, a strong perspective of your root art rather than taking over as the root art. Uh, so whichever one you started with, whichever one you've done most, whichever one spoke to you the best is likely to be the thing that you cater your view to.
Yeah.
And so each person is going to have a different perspective of how that combination comes together.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a beautiful thing, and you can see it. There's people, why are they able to move this way? Well, they've allowed themselves to see many versions of what they're capable of instead of one version, and you're seeing the result of that. They've practiced in different modalities against people that move differently. If you train all three, that's where the name Ken Fu comes from. Ken Fu's what I do. I do Ken Fu.
Yeah.
It's an amalgamation of everything I've ever learned and everything I continue to learn. Each student has their own version of whatever that is. Every martial artist, and it's not even just your martial arts, because it's what did your football give you? What did your wrestling give you? What did your
Yeah.
tennis give you? Whatever it is, what has your physical life experience provided you? What has your body given you? What has your day-to-day work given you? So you become that thing. Where you benefit as a student who trains multiple arts is you end up working with people who only have that one thing. So, uh, we'll talk about Spy Family, right? Spy Family trains all three with me. Uh, a little inside thing for when Randall was here for one of the students. Uh, he gets an opportunity to spar against jujitsu people who only do jujitsu, and karate people who only do karate, and eskrima people who only do eskrima. He does all three, but he has times where he spars against people who do maybe two different arts or maybe all three, just like him. But he's never only sparring karate against karate. He's sparring himself against people that specialize in multiple things.
Hmm.
And that's creating so much opportunity for him to learn his body and how he responds to things and what works well for him and what doesn't, because he's getting more opportunity to measure and pull in data based on people that move entirely differently from other people who prioritize entirely differently, which means he's refining what he's capable of at what I consider a higher rate than somebody that does just one thing. Because generally, if you do one thing, you're also only sparring people who have that same priority and that
Yeah.
same focus,
Sure.
and it's his own thing. It's its own growth potential.
You know what I really liked about all of this with the concept forward and working with the individual through the lens or the views of karate, eskrima, or Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Mm.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu does this. Out of the three, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community does this. The art is a living thing because it is still growing and expanding and mutating and
Mm.
constantly becoming its own thing.
Yeah,
New guards, new animal guards, new chokeholds out of nowhere that nobody ever really thought about with the gi or the no gi, all these other things. And I think that that's something that the classical arts could learn from, because when you have this individual perspective through the concepts and the principles of what make up the system style, whatever you want to call it, it becomes living and breathing again. It's not a dusty old book that's been passed on for 500 generations. It's like if you get one, apostrophe wrong or one period wrong, the book's wrong. It's not the stone tablet from Moses down from the mountains. It's like it's got to be this and this
yeah,
only. It becomes, like I said, a living, breathing thing through the student, through the person and their expression of that. So I
yeah.
don't know. Yeah, that's pretty great. That's pretty great.
I think that's how they all need to work. I don't think that's how they all work, but I think that's how they all need to work. There needs to be, in modern training, there needs to be some element of aliveness in every art, and there needs to be exposure to concepts that you don't agree with or that don't match what you specifically choose to follow. Because how else do you understand your feelings better than to occasionally have them challenged by people who feel differently,
Sure.
and then to have that opportunity to decide, well, do I feel the way that you feel, or do I feel stronger about the way I feel? uh, we need those opportunities in order to become confidently ourselves.
I love that. And that's the evolution process of the stealth, right? It's
Mm.
not stuck in one place. It starts to grow and adapt with the new material, whether that be new techniques, new forms, a new pattern that you learn in a screama, a new
Hey, I think
chokehold.
it's important that it also includes new understandings about the human body
Sure.
and what we now know about the body that we didn't know before. We've got to incorporate that knowledge too. We're learning all the time in other fields that tell us things. Look at our understanding of the fascia versus before we ever
Mhm.
understood that fascia was a thing. Look at the way we look at warm ups and how we warm up the body and how we understand that versus the way that we used to. If we don't include the evolution of knowledge of the body, and we're going to continue to do martial arts, then we'll potentially just be propagating like body issues and failures of our own
Oh,
body.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we.
And we'll never reach our performance potential if we don't accept and embrace ideas, better understandings of how we generate power, how we move, any of that stuff. We got to incorporate it.
Yeah, I'm always looking. It's funny because I like to listen to podcasts, and
Mm.
I'm in a job where I can do that. I can't listen to it while I'm on the bus, but when I take my 15, 20-minute breaks, I'll have my phone, I'll take a little walk, and I'll listen to podcasts. And I find that I like to listen to as many what I call coaches
Mm.
and not just martial artists. Just
Yeah.
Fly performance is amazing. Um, I was listening to one for years, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu podcast. I suck at Jiu Jitsu with Josh
Mm.
McKinney.
Yep.
Fantastic podcast. But in the last few years, I've been listening to BJJ Meditations with
Mm.
Joe from Jersey. That's a great one. And then I've just gotten into BJJ Mental Models. And the way that
Oh, I'm
they,
not familiar with that one. I'm gonna have to check that one
it's
out.
really rich one, a really
Okay.
rich one. And how
Yeah.
they talk is, it's a little bit like our conversation. It's problem solving, it's
Mm.
concepts, it's skill sets, and that's real. And I'm that's what fascinates me. I think I'm just as fascinated, and I think that came from Sifu Mayer, my Wing Chun teacher. He's got a PhD in educational psychology and
Mm.
cognitive development. And I was going to be a teacher for a while until the politics, and I'm like, this isn't going to work for me.
Sure.
But it is the process again of, I have this style
Mm.
or thing called Wing Chun, and I have my own understanding of it. How do I get this understanding of it over to this person? And
Right.
that is, I don't know, that just, that whole process just fascinates me.
Yeah. And how
So
much of it has to get to that person,
sure,
or how much of it needs to just help get them started in creating their own understanding.
I'm very bad at math. That's why I have an English degree. But do you know what a fractal is, sir?
Yeah.
So Sifu Mayer, and this could be wrong, and I probably got the term wrong. So if this is totally wrong, you can blame me. Okay. Sifu Mayer looks at Wing Chun to be a little. It reminds me of a Eskrima. It's globalized learning, is what we call it. You know, um, and what he says is, let's imagine you have the numbers 1 through 10, and for years and years and years, you've been getting by with 2, 3, 7, and 8, and all of a sudden, one day, the concept of one pops in your head, and because you understand what one is, all of a sudden, 5 and 6 come into play. You know, it's kind of the same thing with Wing Chun. You know, you've been using, this one hand shape for years and years and years, but all of a sudden you flip the hand over, and you're like, wait, that one maneuver changes everything I can do. And then just because you've seen it up doesn't mean it doesn't work down. And just because you've seen it on this side of the body doesn't mean that this side of the body can't use it also. And so all of a sudden you start seeing these little tiny links and expressions of how these things work through the body and the mind. And so I think it's just some cool stuff and a neat way to look at things. Instead of this has always been this, and this will only be this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully your learning is never like that and always like first thing, right? Like it's always recycling and revisiting. And I mean, we should know that just from the general process that we've already gone. If we've done any, even a martial art that does this is this and it will always be this, you can't ignore the fact that what you understood it to be on day one versus what you understood it to be
that's right.
on day 100, even
Yeah,
if they have not changed and they're rigid about that, you've already gone through an evolutionary process of your own understanding of what they were trying to tell you. And if that is true, then it's really hard to ignore the potential that a thing could ever only be one thing, and that it would never change and never be subject to change.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of, um, and this is an outsider's point of view.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I might tell you something funny. I'll get some shade thrown at me from my kung fu people, but I love karate. I always have
Hmm.
loved karate. And if it wasn't for the 1984 movie The Karate Kid that I watched at 5 years old, I don't know if I would have fell in love with martial arts like I did. That was
Sure.
the seed in my head. And someday I
Yeah.
might try some karate. Take a class or two. I've always
Yeah.
I've never thrown away that thought in my heart. But that being said, I like to look at the landscape of different arts and different styles. And one of them that I've looked at a lot through the years, and I feel really blessed because I have some really cool people that I get to talk to in the community that is the karate community, and mainly through the Western lens. You know,
Sure.
not so much the Okinawan or the Japanese lens, but and this is just my point of view, and I'm going to share this with you. I've seen kind of a division in the Western view of karate where it either is going into a more modernized kickboxing style and integrating
Okay.
things from other systems, or the exact opposite, where they're going back to some of the Okinawan arts and even trying to find some of the older Southern Chinese arts to
Sure.
integrate that in there. What do you think about that process? I mean, it's got to be, again, the individual and their journey with it, but what do you think works for you and your understanding of what karate is?
It's an interesting question because and it's one that I've asked myself before and have not come to an answer. Is what is karate? Because what is it? Right? We have our ideas of what it is. We sometimes have what people have said that it is. I even own a book from, I think, Masoyama called "What Is Karate." Um, and there's periods of time where it may have meant different things. So at the end of the day, what I wonder is, like, what is the root definition of what makes something karate versus not karate? I don't know the answer to that question. What it seems to me from a historical perspective is a percussive grappling system, that it is a close range, non consensual uh, fighting methodology or physical skill set that is based on solving problems with percussion, right? Um, so my general concept is it is a art that hits people, and it grapples in order to remove barriers so that it can continue to do its primary function of hitting. I leave it wide open for the fact that I might come to understand something different about it at a later time as I continue to invest. But the idea of it branching different ways, the kind of kickboxing direction versus other directions, uh, I think it's natural. I think when you have, what was it, primarily around 50 years ago or so, where it kind of shifted to um, this specific karate versus karate concept, taking what it was good at and then dealing with people who were also good at that thing, that it changed what it had to look like in order to deal with itself. I think any art does, but then the question becomes, well, why are you dealing with yourself?
Sure.
What kind of problem are you in that's the kind of person that you'll deal with? It's like that question you hit on every Instagram post or whatever, where people go, well, this wouldn't work against a trained fighter. Why are you fighting a trained fighter? Like, are you gonna go? Is that what you're doing? Are you a fighter who's gonna go get in the cage and fight trained fighters? Or are you imagining that if you're on the street fighting a trained fighter, this wouldn't work? And then I ask you, why are you on the street fighting a trained fighter? Why does that person think that it's worth his time to fight you with his skill set that he's honed? Um, and why are you ending up in that position? It just doesn't make sense to me. So it makes more sense to me that the art any combative system that was for self-preservation or uh, or military application. I put both of those in there. That anything that falls into that category should be training itself to deal with things that are not itself. Anything that goes to the sport category is generally going to be training to deal with
Yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
of itself.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's where that divide first came. We started, how do you measure whose karate is best? Well, put two of them together and decide which one is better. But that influence changes the concept of what makes good karate. Well, now it's, well, is this person better at fighting this other person? Well, I don't know if that's the right answer. But it certainly leads to more of a kickboxing approach, right? We started introducing, well, we got good at kicking at some point. We probably stole that from the Koreans because they were really good at it. But now that we're getting good at it, now we fight at a different range because feet are able to reach longer, and now we have to manage those. So our fight style looks different versus some of the older methods where you might literally have a fistful of the back of their belt, and they have of yours before you even start, and that was the way a duel might have happened, where you were of that range, um, or that close. What's interesting to me is if you give people different goals. I
Mm.
believe that karate was very inclusive of its methods. It had a thing it was good at. My understanding of that is that if you go far enough back, it started as a grappling art. I think grappling and wrestling is a root thing for most cultures. It's very natural, very easy to make sense that it started there. And we have things saying that Tay was Okinawan grappling or what have you. Okay, so if it's a grappling art and it learned how to hit, sometimes it learned how to use weapons. Sometimes it learned how to throw. It karate got introduced to the jujutsu of Jigoro Kano, and it loved it, and it incorporated things. Right? All these things, I think that it was very inclusive, and it pulled in what it
Yeah.
felt worked for the time. It pulled it in because it was just important that it worked, and not that it was a certain kind of thing, and that the culture of the tradition of how it was done, the ceremony, and that kind of stuff was maybe the parts that kept it karate versus what its content was. Again, I didn't live at that time. It's hard for me to understand if I'm on the right track or not. But if that is true, then that means that karate has the ability to strike at a long range, to strike at a close range, to bridge the distance, to grapple, to throw, to fight on the ground, and why wouldn't it have all of those things? And that it likely does. So to me, one of the most interesting things is when you set people to spar, and like in our dojo, sometimes we'll just get like little tags, almost like flag football, right? I just went and got some like nylon strap, and we just tie it on your belt. Uh, and I say, okay, if you have a flag, then your goal is to get that person on the ground. And if you don't have a flag, your goal is to maintain distance and use long range striking to maintain distance, and have two completely opposite goals.
Hmm.
And even if they're not opposite, but just have two different goals, and then watch what it looks like. Because one of the things that I think foils the martial arts the most, in my interpretation, and it definitely foiled me, is when we duel. If you and I agree to fight using the same concepts as each other, then 50% or more of our time is spent preparing to manage what the other person is doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe that these arts were meant for that. I think that they were meant for somebody who had a particular goal, and that person was driving towards that goal. And that your goal was to overcome that in whatever way was necessary, to keep yourself safe. So what needs to be included in the sparring concept is a goal that doesn't change, that there's not this kind of back and forth testing the waters. I think that testing the waters is generally the part that doesn't exist. if I was a ne'er-do-well and I wanted to hurt you, I probably wouldn't poke at you and check and poke at you and check. I'd
Mhm.
probably just go after you like a predator. And why do I care what you would do? Because I ideally think that I am going to succeed no matter what. And my chances of success go way up if I don't wait around to figure out what you might do about it. That concept needs to exist when you're testing your art's ability. You need to have to just deal with what does it feel like when somebody's kind of unrelenting and they don't back off and test the water and come back in, but instead they keep pressuring and keep pressuring and keep pressuring. Even if it's not very aggressive, it just doesn't stop.
Yeah.
They never take a break and reset. They just keep coming and keep coming. Well, just the mental component of that is so critical. And then how does your artwork? I was working with some people this week, and I was like, hey, what problem do you feel like you're running into? It's like distance. In order to do, we were working elbows, and the concept was, okay, well, why does it feel like it's not working? Well, they're not close enough. I don't feel close enough to land the elbow. Okay, well, let's look at this situation. If he's coming at you, like actively coming at you this whole time, isn't the distance solving itself?
Yeah.
So what is it that you're doing to create new distance that maybe you could just not do and just let him do what he's
Hmm.
trying to do and take advantage of
Hmm.
the fact that it's solving the problem that we're observing. And then we looked at that, and then kind of like, oh well, it's working more now. Yeah, well, if they're trying to come to you, let them. If you want them close to you and they're trying to get close to you, then you don't have to solve that part of the equation. You've outsourced that, and you're allowing it to be done.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
you just got to solve the part that is on your plate. Uh, but those are things that you don't get to experience in a symmetrical thing. So that's where I've done kickboxing and I like it. We got a great kickboxing coach. I think it's super fun. It's definitely a great way to stay
Yes.
fit. It's exhausting.
Yes.
It's very, very athletic. The skill that it takes to have that kind of stamina, move around in that way, be quick, have really good timing. A lot of it's really fast. Very impressed by it. But it doesn't have that component for me. It becomes who is better at playing that particular game, who is better at managing those things in a situation that does not feel like one that has to exist in the real world in any capacity. And that's the same for boxing and a lot of things. You look at, I think one of the reasons why I like wrestling as a concept, even though I never did it, um, is the fact that when you watch wrestlers, they really don't test each other much. They go. They go
Yeah.
after each other. You watch wrestlers, you watch judoka, they go. The grapplers go. The strikers play and float in and out. The going matches what I think having to protect yourself feels like. The playing matches nothing that appears organically day to day in a self protection perspective. So if my interpretation of your question were to be, which do I feel has more merit in relation to the role of karate, it would be the asymmetrical method and not the symmetrical method.
Awesome. Awesome. I guess I've got maybe one last question for the day, and we
Sure.
should come back and do this another time because this has been
Yeah, man. Anytime. This is
a real
fun.
blessing. Yeah, totally, totally, totally. What do you feel? How has I have my own perspective. I do Chinese martial arts,
Mm,
and I've said that before. But our talu or our kata is so very different from when I'm doing Wing Chun to Xingyi to Bagua. And those
okay.
kata are very um, driven in certain categories, you know.
Sure.
So, how has your relationship over the years changed and your point of view on kata? And do you still feel it's necessary? Or is that something that you're looking at? I'm kind of boiling it down to just a few essential kata.
I'm definitely not getting rid of it. I love kata.
I do too.
Um, I I would never get rid of it. Even if I did, I'd never stop doing it. If I'm willing to recognize that I can love a thing and not have it be serving me towards
Sure.
my goals. So if I ever look at the school and I feel like it's in the way of the learning, then I'm certainly not keeping it for the sake of keeping it. I still believe it has value though, so I have not gotten rid of it. But I am not afraid to remove it if I feel like it's not serving the students. If there are better ways or it needs replaced, that's fine. I'm not there yet, but we spend 5 minutes on it. True, like literally, we set a timer for 5 minutes. Um, we're reworking our curriculum. We're reworking how we're going about teaching classes. And currently, except for the first day of the month where we spend 25 minutes introducing that section of the kata and maybe providing a little bit deeper understanding of any kind of details that might be helpful while you explore it on your own. Outside of that, the rest of the month, it's the second 5 minutes of class. We spend 5 minutes working on break falls and things to make sure that you are prepared to protect your body for any kind of training we might do. And then 5 minutes going through the kata. And then we spend the rest of the time working some sort of application. And more importantly, some sort of partner based work, since the main thing you get in a class environment that you don't get when you're training on your own is a partner. So
Yep.
the portion of class that's on solo practice needs to be small. That's stuff you can take with you and do elsewhere. You don't always have a partner. That should make up the majority of classes working with partners. So very little emphasis. Use it more as um, it truly, and I know that this is the same way that people have described it for decades, and I think that's because it's probably just the most accurate. It's kind of a syllabus. It's just written weird, right? You go
Yep.
start a college class, you get a syllabus, and it lines out. Here's what you're going to be doing. Here's how we're going to shape this, and here's what the end of the program looks like. Um, the kata does that. It just doesn't do it in like a nice laid out written form. I do think it does it in a progressive outline that's taking you. One thing that I believe about kata, and I believe that if you're, and this might be a hot take, I don't know. I believe that I have observed and worked to change in my own environment where your interpretation of kata and the application of it is disjointed, and it's just trying to match what it feels like might be happening with this movement, what this movement looks like, or
Yeah.
whatever. But then when you look at it and put them all together with the shape of the kata itself, that they don't actually go together. To me, that's a sign that those applications, while they might be functional things that you can do, are probably not being drawn by the kata itself. I do believe that the kata is progressive. I wish I had a time machine and I could just go ask the questions. Why did you build it this way? Why
Yeah.
is it this? Why is it this? But when I feel the most connected to kata is when I look at the overall form itself and I look at the initial application. And if I can also see that whatever the principle is, and it should probably be pretty simple. Um, I was just working with someone on Naihanchi, and it's like, okay, what's the most important thing in the fight for you to protect? It's your head. Like, don't be unconscious. It's really hard to keep fighting and protect yourself if you're unconscious. So maybe the first principle is protect your head. And the first application shows us a couple ways of doing such a thing. Well, if we continue to progress, if I'm protecting my head in the way that I interpret these actions to be, what are the ways that somebody would like overcome them or prevent me? So if I cover my head and my next thing is to smash a couple elbows. Let's look at, I mean, techie, right? Open up, smash the elbow. Like it's pretty obvious, I think, to anybody that at some point you're going to hit somebody with an elbow. Okay, so I protect my head. That's pretty important. Step one. Step two. One of the safest ways and most reliable ways, both in a preemption method or a um, reactive method, is to close distance, either because you closed it or because they closed it. But you're only safe in two places: really close or really far away. Anything in the middle is dangerous. So let's lean on the fact that close is likely. So we got close. Okay, well then elbow's a great tool because we are close. All right. Well then everything from then on out should also be showing ways of dealing. Okay, if I throw elbows, what are you likely to do? I'm likely to cover up, put a hand up or something to try to stop that elbow from happening. Okay. Well, do you see how this movement is showing us a way to deal with that? And it should feel progressive. It should feel like questions. Okay, well, if you're doing that, like what? All right, what's on the high line? Okay, well, this part of the kata is showing us the same thing, but on the low line. Here's how you might approach it if the low line was the answer instead of the high line. Instead of buckling down and shooting like a grappler, they stood up and tried to strike. Okay, well, let's look at those two branches of responses to the questions that might get asked. If the application of the kata follows a progression that starts with a concept and also deals with the challenges you might have succeeding in that concept, then to me, that's the syllabus. That's the understanding. If your application doesn't do that, I don't think that in whole or in part, it might not be correct. That's my own belief. While those might be good things, I don't necessarily think they're the appropriate thing. Don't throw them out. If you like that technique and it works for you, great. But then the kata is irrelevant. If all you have is a bag of things that you like that kind of look like the kata, then the kata itself is not important. You'd probably be better to get better at those things and develop your own kata if you wanted a kata at all.
Oh, I
But
like
if
that.
the kata is showing you a progression through the lesson, I'm going to make you capable of defending yourself. And we're going to start with protecting your head. And then we're going to start with overwhelming the person so you can get away or stop them in some kind of way. And then we're going to deal with the challenges that you might face with that and how you might do it. And we're going to escalate it as it goes to deal with more and more challenging situations. And we're going to recognize that all of this should be able to be mixed and matched in whatever way in a live resistance environment. Then to me, then that is a syllabus. Here's what we plan to cover in this course. This is Naihanchi 101. And then here's what we plan to do. Your kata should be a syllabus. And as an instructor, that kata is incredibly helpful, especially if you don't always have a million students. Sometimes you might have a whole bunch of advanced students for a while, and then suddenly you've got a beginner student that you're like, hey, we haven't actually touched this more beginner concept that we usually share to beginners in a while. Well, the kata is a great way to remind yourself of the syllabus. It's no different than a teacher looking back and be like, let me bring up my lesson plan for the 101 class. Okay, yep, I see. We typically go through these things. I'm gonna brush that off and get ready to teach. I feel like a physical art has a physical syllabus, and that is an incredibly helpful mnemonic tool that also happens to be beautiful. It also happens to be a great exercise. It also helps to be a great mental exercise. Like you can be really, it can really help you kind of clear your head or whatever. There's so many benefits from it that I don't know why I'd ever get rid of it. But I can understand how if somebody did not have that connection to it the way I just described, how it would be very, very enticing to just ditch it.
Sure.
It's irrelevant.
Sure.
And what they've probably done is replaced it with a written syllabus of here's what I plan to cover in the order I plan to cover it. Okay, then you got your syllabus. So you're still probably teaching good stuff. You're still probably doing your thing, and I think that's great. But I love the physical syllabus.
I do
I
too.
love the form.
I do too. That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, on the way out,
Yeah.
tell me what Ken is working on right now in his own training.
Well, obviously, a big part is working on confidence. Feeling confident in being able to train without running risk to the recovery that I'm going through on my hand. So that's a big part, is slowly building into more and more training and slowly warming up the water of how what kind of level can I train with and feel safe in that I'm not going to get hurt or set myself back on this recovery. When it comes to the arts, at all of them, I'm relooking at the curriculum entirely. We're reworking the curriculum and working with students, my senior students on that, and we're reworking the curriculum for all of it because the biggest thing that I am recognizing, and especially recognized because of this hand situation, is I had to be out. I had to let somebody else take over. And while it went just as good as I expected it to, I think it was more stressful than it needed to be, because not
Mm.
everybody is me. I'm comfortable going in and teaching like that. This is what I do. This is the material I know. This is how I think about it. I live it. I breathe it. I love it. Not everybody works that way. Some people
Yeah.
need a list, somebody need an outline, an instruction. Here's how, that doesn't mean bad teachers, right? Some teachers can walk in and give the best lecture of their life with zero prep. Some teachers need to have prepped for a week before they go give that lecture. Both are great teachers. That's fine. But what I realize is, because I don't have a lot of written curriculum, I don't have a lot of written stuff. All of my stuff was very uh, based on intuition, right? Like, what am I
Yeah.
observing? What am I seeing? How do I modify this stuff for you? What do you need on an individual level? That means I haven't left a structure that somebody who doesn't work the way that I do can feel confident in taking over and taking those reins. And so, I had to be out for almost a year, very suddenly, very unexpectedly. But also, I'm getting older. There might be a time where I'm just generally not available anymore. How well have I prepared my students to continue doing this if that's what they want to do without me? Uh, how well can they do this? How well is what I've done able to move on to future generations if it's going to do that? And so right now we're working on building a syllabus that kind of boils that down into maybe a less flexible, less intuitive base, and more structured, more intentional, progressive base. Um, and I, have my own challenges with that, because I liked the way that I liked it. But I got to recognize that this art is bigger than me. The school is bigger than me. These people are more important than what I personally think. So a lot of reworking syllabus and a lot of reestablishing how we plan to pass knowledge, and
Isn't that
how I'm preparing people after me to continue on their own.
I love that because what you're talking about is you have a relationship with this material. But
Mhm.
just going back to right at the beginning, what we were talking about, you also want your students to have a relationship with the material. And that means that how you train your Ken Fu might not be how somebody else trains their Ken Fu. And so you're showing your students not only how to train it through their own lens, but how to teach it through someone might need a different lens than let's say Spy Family becomes a teacher, right?
Yeah,
And he's a great teacher. He's going to be in the same boat that Ken is. Spy Family might train his Spy Family Fu in his own way. He might teach the Okinawan karate. He
yeah,
might teach the Eskrima, and he might teach the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and have his own way of training it on
yeah,
how he sees that material. But to be a good teacher, you also have to see and work how that material might be through somebody that learns differently. We all learn differently. And because we all learn differently, I think that's amazing if you think about it that way too, is that means that your karate can have different people learn it. That
yeah,
means that there's different ways to look at the system. You know, I have my Wing Chun class down there. I've got a couple housewives. I have an engineer, and I have all these different people through all these walks of lives, and
yeah.
so they're all doing Wing Chun, but how they relate to it makes it theirs.
One of the things that I love that we've seen over time, that I just absolutely love, is over time and through this intent to make it where it is not my way. It is my art, and the thing that I love, passed on by whoever's passing it, is now, if you look at uh, students performing kata, or students fighting, students, stuff like that, you'll see. I mean, I can look around the room and be like, "Yep, I know who in this room is your influence, and I know that it's not me, and I know that it's working really well for you, and I can see that you have attached yourself to this senior student. and their way is working well for you. And I love it. I look around, I see everybody's different ways, and I'm like, that's cool. I feel like that's what it should look like. It shouldn't be a room full of people that look like me. And that was something that Hunchy Finley would has always passed to me over all the years. Is he's like, if I have a room full of students that look like me, then I've failed. And that's something that I carry with me all the time. And I'm happy that I can say that if you come in and look at our school, you will not see a room full of people that look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And that means a lot because they're not bad. They're really good at what they do. And they don't have to look like me to be good at what they do.
That's amazing. What's Ken Fu up to these days? You've taken a little break from it, but could we see a little bit more of Ken Fu TV and the horizon of 2025?
With any luck, you'll see it before 2025.
Awesome.
Really hoping to see a handful of videos in the next month, maybe in the next week.
Ooh.
Don't know. You'll have to watch.
Awesome. Well, this is great because when this posts tomorrow, it takes the little YouTube computer out in space a little bit of time to process all this. We'll have you tagged and let the audience know where they can find you and if they're willing to swing up by Casper, Wyoming, what they would learn at the Casper Dojo.
Yeah. You can find anything that you might want to know about me. You can find at kenfu.tv. That's just kind of a place that I've had anything that I'm doing kind of centralized to make it easy to find. Primarily the medium that works best for me is long form video content, and that's over at YouTube. Kenfu TV is what you're going to find. As far as our school, Casper Dojo, Casper, Wyoming, I wanted it simple to find, and didn't want it to reflect me. I want it to be a place in Casper that supports the community. I'm not the only teacher there. You're going to find karate, you're going to find jiu-jitsu, you're going to find eskrima. Of course, these are the things that I do. You're going to find kickboxing, you're going to find tai chi, you're going to find one of the coolest kids programs going in this area. We've got a lot of stuff happening. All of that stuff is happening all the time. That's what I hope to build. That's what I hope to leave behind is an impact in the community that's positive and one that lets people explore who they are and in whatever medium makes sense, in a place that they feel safe to be themselves and to grow in their confidence and to explore all these really cool martial arts that we love. Casper, over time, I found, had a lot of great teachers that did a lot of great martial arts. And I hope and have made it my mission to just expose people to the fact that Casper has a lot of great martial artists.
I have a Mount Rushmore of forward-thinking classical martial artists that are doing something unique in the world and something really special. And I want you to know that you're one of those guys on that Mount Rushmore. I think you're very welcome. And it's not just to, for kudos. I'll tell you a little bit of a story on our way out here. So it's kind of a reverse order. So a good friend, mutual friend of ours, Greg, of Conversations on Karate, was on a little show that I was also on called The Everyday Martial Artists with my friend Brian Doucette. And if you ever get a chance to be on the show, it's a great show. It's super fun talking about martial arts with Brian. And so I listened to Greg's episode, super impressed, really liked what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I can go listen to another podcast. So I started listening to Conversations on Karate, and about 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 episodes in, I'm like, who's this Kenneth Knight guy? And so it was you, and it was our your twin brother over at Somerset Karate.
Yep, Joe.
Joe, and then Miss Susie, who I adore. Miss Susie. I try to pick on her as much as I can through Instagram. I'm like, how you doing, Susie? And she comes back with her wonderful voice. And so I listened to that episode, and I'm like, holy cow, this Ken guy's got something going on. There's some bats in his belfry that are getting work done. And so I found Kenfu TV from Conversations on Karate and really delved into some of your topics. And awesome. I was wildly impressed. And I'm like, that's someone that's within, 5 hours less of me. I need to go meet that person because that's where I've moved my Wing Chun practice and teaching. It's less on, yes, it's always going to be Wing Chun, but like, how does the student interact with this stuff material? That's where I'm
Yeah.
really trying. As a matter of fact, leave it 2 cents on again on the way out the door. I'm really starting to teach the students to relate to themselves through the structures. And it's less about this hand is this name, it has to be at this angle, it has to do this. It's like, well, it's got to deal with force. But before you deal with somebody else's force, can you feel the structure in your feet? Can you feel a connection in your own body? Because you need to start having a relationship with yourself before you can deal with the other. At least that's how I teach it. And I found that a lot of folks, back to social media and the blessings of it, a lot of folks spend their time on this small device that you and I are talking to all day long. And what happens is you're basically putting your mind in this 7-inch device.
Mhm.
And so you disassociate yourself with your own body. And so Wing Chun is very much a fine motor skill art. And so what I do is I give them some bigger gross motor skills to start to develop a relationship with their body. Have you ever thought about the back of your knee? When was the last time you thought about that? Do you know your whole kneecap? How's your hip moving? All those other things. And then when they can self-diagnose, then they can start to hold these weird, funky postures. It's like, well, are you only thinking about your hand? What about your forearm? What about the upper arm? What's going on the other side of your body that's actually not doing that hand shape? And then not just the other hand, but the whole body itself. How's your stance? How's your posture? Because all of those relate to structure. And then when you do the fixed structure, then you can start doing the moving structure. And can you carry the qualities in your movement that you created in your static? So, and then blending those two together. And then you can kind of use it as a whiteboard. I always like I like the whiteboard stuff, but the whiteboard stuff has to translate into where does the rubber hit the road. But anyway, I thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, love it. Love it.
Ken, it's always a pleasure to see you. I look forward to seeing you again in person, and I hope to do this again. And I will share this video with you and your crew when it gets posted. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your weekend.
Sounds great. You too, Randall. Take care,
my friend.